The applause was a physical thing, a wave of pressure that pushed the air from Alara Sterling's lungs. It was for him. Of course, it was for him. Marcus Vance stood on the stage, bathed in a spotlight that seemed to burnish his already perfect teeth and his impeccably tailored suit. He held the obsidian prism, the highest honor in international architecture, and he was accepting it for a building he did not design. He was accepting it for a building that had been born in the quiet, desperate hours of Alara's nights. A building that was a map of her own soul rendered in steel and glass. She stood in the shadowed alcove near the service exit, a ghost in an emerald gown. The fabric was a whisper of silk against her skin, a color chosen by Marcus because it complemented his tie. She felt less like a woman and more like an accessory, an exquisitely crafted piece of set dressing for the grand performance of his success. His hand had been a brand on the small of her back all evening, a constant, proprietary pressure that communicated ownership to every person they passed. He had not updated the file. He was working from a version of her that had never been accurate, a version that was compliant, silent, and grateful. That version had expired tonight. She did not hate him. Hate was too hot, too demanding an emotion. What she felt was the cold, dense exhaustion of a star that has collapsed in on itself. For 5 years, she had been the engine of his firm, the source of every innovative line, every breathtaking cantilever, every space that made the human heart feel both sheltered and vast. And for 5 years, he had taken the credit, presenting her work as his own with a casual, confident smile that made her question her own reality. The contract she had signed in a moment of youthful desperation was an iron cage, and he rattled its bars whenever he sensed a flicker of rebellion. His speech was winding down. He was thanking his team, a generic sweeping gesture that included everyone and therefore no one. He thanked his parents, his university, the city itself. He did not say her name. The omission was not an oversight. It was a statement. It was the final, deliberate turn of the screw. She felt a strange, hollow calm settle in her chest. The kind of silence that doesn't echo. The kind that settles. It was the calm of a final decision. She was done. As the applause swelled again, a final deafening roar, she turned. She did not want to see him walk off that stage, clutching her soul in his hands. She slipped through the service door, the sudden quiet of the back corridor a balm on her frayed nerves. The air was cool, smelling of industrial cleaner and chilled champagne from the carts lined against the wall. She leaned her head back, the plaster cool against her heated skin, and closed her eyes. One breath. Another. She was just formulating a plan, a taxi, her small apartment, the go-bag she had packed months ago and never had the courage to use, when the door swung open behind her. "And where do you think you're going?" Marcus's voice was a low snarl, stripped of the polished charm he wore like a cloak. The prism was in his hand, but he held it like a weapon, not a trophy. "I felt unwell," she said, her voice even. She did not look at him. She kept her eyes on the scuffed linoleum floor. "Unwell." He laughed, a short, ugly sound. "You look fine to me. You look ungrateful. I just gave the speech of my life, a speech that secures our future, and you sneak out like a thief. We have to network. The mayor wants a word. The Chin Consortium is here." "Your future, Marcus," she corrected him, her voice barely a whisper. "Not ours." That was a mistake. She knew it the moment the words left her lips. The air thickened. He crossed the distance between them in 2 long strides, his body radiating a heat that was pure rage. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into the delicate skin above her elbow. "What did you say?" "Let go of my arm," she said, her voice gaining a sliver of steel. She finally lifted her head and met his gaze. His eyes, so often described as charming and intense in magazines, were just small, dark, and furious. "You have an obligation," he hissed, his face close to hers. His breath was sour with expensive wine. "You signed a contract. Everything you think, everything you create, it belongs to me. You belong to me." Did you really think you could just walk away? I'm not your property, she said, trying to pull her arm free. His grip tightened, a bruising, deliberate cruelty. He pushed her back against the wall, the impact jarring her teeth. You are whatever I say you are, he spat, his face contorted. You are a nobody without me, a glorified draftsman. I gave you a life you could only dream of, and you will stand by my side and you will smile and you will look grateful until I tell you otherwise. She did not scream. She did not struggle. She simply went still, a profound and terrible stillness. She looked past his shoulder into the dimness of the corridor and waited for the end of the world. It came not as a bang, but as a quiet question, spoken from the shadows at the far end of the hall. Is there a problem here? The voice was low, calm, and carried an unnerving weight. It was steady as iron wrapped in silk. Marcus froze, his head whipping around. Ilara saw him then, a man leaning against the opposite wall, almost invisible in the gloom. He was tall, dressed in a charcoal suit that seemed to absorb the light around it. He held a glass of what looked like whiskey, the ice clinking softly as he straightened up. He was not performing. He did not rush. He simply moved from the shadows into the weak fluorescent light, and the entire geometry of the corridor shifted around him. This is a private conversation, Marcus snapped, trying to reassert his dominance. He puffed out his chest, a pathetic display of territorial aggression. The man took a slow, deliberate sip from his glass. His eyes, dark and unnervingly perceptive, were fixed on Marcus's hand, still clamped around Ilara's arm. It ceased to be private when you put your hands on her. Look, pal, Marcus began, his voice dripping with condescension. I don't know who you think you are, but this is my wife, so why don't you— She is not your wife, the man stated. It was not a question or an argument. It was a correction of a factual error. And you have 3 seconds to remove your hand. Marcus laughed, a sound of pure disbelief. Or what? The man didn't answer. He simply tilted his head slightly. From the shadows behind him, 2 other men emerged. They were built with the dense, quiet economy of professional soldiers or high-end security. They wore the same dark suits, their faces impassive. They moved without wasted motion, their presence a promise of swift, overwhelming force. Marcus's bravado evaporated. The swagger drained from his posture, replaced by a sudden, stark fear. He had spent his life navigating boardrooms and cocktail parties, wielding influence built on charm and stolen ideas. This was a different kind of power. This was structural. This was absolute. He looked from the 2 men to the man with the whiskey, and for the first time he seemed to truly see him. A flicker of panicked recognition crossed his face. He had seen him in the financial pages, in grainy photos at exclusive global summits. Jinwoo Kwon, the CEO of Kwon Industries, a man who moved markets with a whisper, a man rumored to have ties to a world far darker and more disciplined than real estate development. Marcus's hand dropped from Ilara's arm as if it had been burned. He took a step back, holding his hands up in a placating gesture. Mr. Kwon, I apologize. A misunderstanding. My fiancé and I were just having a passionate disagreement. Jin Kwon's gaze did not waver. It was not angry. It was something far more unnerving. It was diagnostic. He was looking at Marcus the way a geologist looks at a rock sample, identifying its composition and its breaking point. Mr. Park, Jin said quietly, his eyes still on Marcus. One of the other men, older, with silver at his temples and an air of lethal competence, stepped forward. Sir. Escort Mr. Vance back to the party, Jin instructed. Ensure he understands that his presence is no longer required here, or anywhere else I might be. Understood, sir. Mr. Park's voice was as calm and final as his employer's. He gestured, and the second man moved to Marcus's side. They didn't touch him, not yet. They simply flanked him, their proximity an undeniable command. Marcus looked from them to Jin, then to Ilara, his face a mask of confusion and fury. Ilara, are you coming? The question was weak, pathetic, a final, desperate grasp for control. She looked at the red marks his fingers had left on her skin. She looked at the man who had cornered her, who had claimed ownership of her very soul. Then she looked at Jin Kwan, who stood watching her, his expression unreadable, waiting for her answer. "No," she said. The word was small, but it filled the entire corridor. Marcus's face crumpled, not because he was sorry, because he was caught. Mr. Park and his associate gently, but inexorably, guided him away, his protests dissolving into muffled, impotent muttering. The corridor was silent again, save for the hum of the ice machines. Ilara was alone with Jin Kwan. She was trembling now, the adrenaline giving way to a deep, bone-rattling shock. She wrapped her arms around herself, a futile attempt to hold her splintering world together. He did not move closer. He gave her the space, a courtesy so profound it almost made her weep. He set his glass down on a nearby service cart. "Are you injured?" he asked. His voice was softer now, the iron wrapped in several more layers of silk. She shook her head, unable to speak. He shrugged off his suit jacket. It was a beautiful thing, charcoal wool so fine it draped like liquid. He held it out to her. She hesitated. Accepting it felt like accepting something else, something she couldn't yet name. But she was so cold. She allowed him to drape it over her shoulders. The fabric was heavy, warm, and smelled faintly of cedar and clean night air. It felt like a shield. "I have a suite upstairs," he said. "It is quiet. You would be safe there. My car is also available if you would prefer to leave." He was giving her choices. After years of having none, the simple act felt radical. "Why?" she finally managed to ask, her voice hoarse. "Why did you do that?" Jin Kwan picked up his glass again, swirling the amber liquid. He looked at her, and for the first time she felt truly seen. His gaze wasn't invasive or possessive. It was appreciative, like an expert recognizing a masterpiece that had been hung in a dusty, forgotten corner. "Because I am an investor in the Vance Tower," he said simply. "A significant one. And I make it a point to know the true value of my assets." He paused, letting the words settle. "I saw the original concept submissions, Miss Sterling, the ones without a name attached. I knew then that the architect was not Marcus Vance. His work has always been derivative, loud. This was genius. It was quiet. It was strong." Ilara stared at him, her mind struggling to process his words. He knew her name. Not Vance. Sterling. He knew her work. He had seen her, the real her, hidden behind the wall of Marcus's ego. "I have been aware of your situation for some time," he continued, his voice a low, steady anchor in her swirling confusion. "I was waiting for you to decide you were finished." The realization washed over her. He hadn't just stumbled upon them. He had been there, in the background, observing. He was not a random savior. He was an agent of change, waiting for the catalyst. She had just provided it. "Come," he said gently. "Let's get you away from all this noise." He led her not back towards the gala, but down a private hallway to a service elevator. Mr. Park was waiting for them, his presence as unobtrusive and solid as a stone wall. The ride up to the penthouse floor was silent. Ilara stood wrapped in Jin's jacket, the warmth seeping into her skin, chasing away some of the chill. She felt suspended between two lives, the one that had just shattered in a back corridor, and another, entirely unknown, that was beginning in this silent, ascending box of steel. The suite was less a room and more a sprawling apartment in the sky. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a glittering panorama of the city, a city whose newest, brightest jewel she had designed. It was a bitter irony. A woman entered, a housekeeper by her uniform, and offered Ilara a glass of water with a slice of lemon. She took it, her hand shaking so badly the water sloshed over the rim. Jin Kwan gestured to a deep, cream-colored sofa. "Please, sit." She did, sinking into the plush cushions. He remained standing, keeping a respectful distance near the window, his silhouette framed against the city lights. He seemed to be part of the skyline, just as permanent and powerful. "My legal team has been on retainer for this eventuality for the past 6 months," he stated, as if discussing the weather. "They have already prepared the initial filings to invalidate your contract with Vance on the grounds of professional coercion and intellectual property theft. They are very, very good at what they do." 6 months. He had been planning this for 6 months. The thought was both terrifying and strangely comforting. She was not a damsel in distress he had rescued on a whim. She was a strategic acquisition he had been patiently waiting to liberate. The corporate metaphor was cold, but in its coldness, there was a reassuring lack of sentimentality. This was a transaction, and she understood transactions. "What do you want from me?" she asked, the question sharp. She was tired of being a possession, a tool, an asset. He turned from the window, his expression serious. "I want to offer you a position," he said. "As the head of a new architectural division at Quan Industries, you will have an unlimited budget, full creative control, and your name, your real name, will be on every project. I am not interested in building monuments to myself, Miss Sterling. I am interested in building the future. Your designs do that. I want to give you the resources to build it on a global scale." It was an impossible offer. It was everything she had ever dreamed of, handed to her in the wreckage of her life, and that made her suspicious. Nothing was free. "In exchange for what?" she pressed. "In exchange for your genius," he said simply. "That is all." She looked at him, searching his face for the lie, the hook, the hidden clause. She found none. He was not a man who needed to lie. His power was not performative like Marcus's. It was foundational. He did not need to posture or persuade. He stated facts. The sky is blue. Water is wet. Your talent is generational, and I wish to invest in it. "I need time," she said, her voice small. "I need to think." "Of course," he replied without hesitation. "This suite is yours for as long as you need it. My staff will see to your comfort. There is a phone on the table. The first number on the speed dial is for Mr. Park. He can arrange for anything you require. The second is my personal cell. Use it if you wish. Or not. The choice is yours." He gave a slight, formal bow of his head. "Good night, Miss Sterling." And then he was gone, leaving her alone in the vast, silent suite, wrapped in his jacket, with the city she had helped shape glittering at her feet. The silence he left behind was different from the one in the corridor. It was not the silence of collapse. It was the silence of possibility, vast and frightening and full of stars. The next few days passed in a blur of disorienting calm. Ilara slept in a bed larger than her entire bedroom, the sheets a thread count she couldn't even guess. She ate meals that appeared as if by magic, served by a staff that moved with spectral quietness. She spoke at length with Jin's lawyers, a team of razor-sharp men and women who listened to her story with grim-faced validation. They explained the mountain of evidence they had already compiled: sworn affidavits from former junior architects at Marcus's firm, metadata pulled from her old work computers, even financial records showing a pattern of Marcus taking lavish vacations immediately after she completed a major design phase. They were not building a case. They were documenting a foregone conclusion. She did not call Jin. She needed to prove to herself that she could navigate this new world on her own terms. She had Mr. Park arrange for her belongings to be retrieved from the apartment she had shared with Marcus. The request was handled with terrifying efficiency. A team was dispatched, her items were packed and delivered, and a restraining order was served to Marcus, all within the space of 3 hours. Mr. Park reported this to her via a brief, concise text message. He was less an assistant and more a force of nature. On the 4th day, a package arrived. It was a large, flat portfolio case made of dark leather. Inside were blueprints for a new waterfront development project in Seoul. There was a note attached, written on heavy cream cardstock in a precise, angular hand. "Your thoughts on the structural integrity of the west facade would be appreciated. J.K." It was a test and a temptation. She spent the next 2 days absorbed in the plans, her mind lighting up for the first time in years. The original design was competent but uninspired. She saw the flaws, but more importantly, she saw the potential. She spread the blueprints across the enormous marble dining table and began to sketch, her pen flying across tracing paper. She redesigned the load-bearing structures, shifted the flow of public space, and reimagined the facade as a series of cascading glass waves that would reflect the changing light on the Han River. She lost track of time, forgetting to eat, forgetting to sleep. She was not Elara Sterling, the victim. She was Elara Sterling, the architect. She was home. When she was finished, she called the second number on the speed dial. He answered on the first ring. "Quan, it's Elara Sterling." "I know," he said. There was no surprise in his voice. "I trust you are well." "The design is flawed," she said, getting straight to the point. "The foundation is sound, but the aesthetic is a decade old, and the wind shear calculations for the upper floors are optimistic. It needs to be completely re-envisioned." A beat of silence on the other end of the line. Then a low sound that might have been a chuckle. "I see. I am at the site now. Would you be willing to share your notes?" "I'll have them sent over," she said. "No," he replied. "I would prefer if you brought them yourself. A car is waiting for you downstairs." She found herself agreeing before she had fully processed it. Half an hour later, she was in the back of a black Maybach gliding silently through the city streets. She was dressed in a simple black dress she'd had delivered, her hair pulled back in a severe professional knot. She clutched the roll of her revised blueprints like a shield. She was walking into a meeting, not a rescue. It was a distinction that mattered. Their relationship developed over blueprints and steel fabrication reports. It was a slow, respectful courtship conducted in boardrooms and on construction sites. He never complimented her appearance, but he would praise the elegance of her solution to a zoning problem. He never touched her, but he would hand her a cup of tea, made exactly how she liked it during a late-night work session. He was not trying to win her affection. He was demonstrating his recognition of her competence. For Elara, who had been systematically unseen for so long, it was more intoxicating than any shallow romance. He gave her an office at Quan Industries, a minimalist space of glass and white oak with a view that stretched to the horizon. He gave her a team. He gave her a purpose that was entirely her own. Meanwhile, in the background, Marcus Vance's world was being quietly and systematically dismantled. Mr. Park would deliver brief, occasional updates. "Vance's primary lender has called in his loans, sir." "The board of his company has convened an emergency meeting to discuss his removal." "His penthouse has been placed in foreclosure." Jin would simply nod, his expression unchanging. He was not taking pleasure in the destruction. He was simply removing a bug from the system. It was pest control, not vengeance. Marcus, however, did not see it that way. Blinded by an arrogance so profound it bordered on a clinical delusion, he could not comprehend that his downfall was his own doing. In his mind, Elara had been stolen from him by a foreign predator, a thug who had used brute force to take what was rightfully his. He saw himself as the victim. He filed a frivolous, rambling lawsuit against both Elara and Quan Industries, accusing them of conspiracy and theft. It was a desperate, pathetic move. His lawyers, seeing the writing on the wall, abandoned him. He was forced to represent himself, a spectacle of flailing incompetence that was swiftly dismissed by the court. He tried to leak stories to the press, painting Elara as a mentally unstable gold digger, but Jin's PR team was a fortress. They neutralized every story before it could gain traction. Marcus was screaming into a void. Then came the invitation. Jin's mother was hosting her annual charity gala at the family's sprawling estate outside the city. It was the social event of the season, a gathering of old money, new power, and political influence. Jin's name was on the invitation as a co-host, and in a small, elegant script at the bottom was Elara's. "In honor of Elara Sterling, Chief Architect of the Quan Global Design Division." "I don't have to go," she told him standing in his office. "I would like you to be there," he said, not looking up from a document he was reading. "My mother wishes to meet you." The thought sent a spike of anxiety through her. Meeting the matriarch of the Quan dynasty felt like a final exam for a class she hadn't known she was taking. "She'll hate me." He finally looked up, his gaze direct. My mother is traditional. She values family, loyalty, and strength. She is a formidable judge of character. She will not hate you. He paused. She will, however, be assessing you. Do not let it intimidate you. You have been the most capable person in every room you have been in for the last 5 years. Her drawing room is no different. His confidence in her was a tangible thing. It settled her nerves. She would go. She would wear a dress of her own choosing, and she would stand on her own 2 feet. The estate was breathtaking, a traditional Korean palace surrounded by acres of meticulously landscaped gardens. The gala was in full swing, a sea of silk gowns and dark suits murmuring under the light of 1,000 paper lanterns. Ilara wore a dress of architecturally precise, midnight blue silk. It was severe and elegant, a statement of intent. Jin met her at the entrance, taking her hand and tucking it into the crook of his arm. It was the first time he had initiated such a public gesture of intimacy. It felt less like a romantic claim and more like a declaration of alliance. Mrs. Kwan was exactly as formidable as Jin had described. A small, elegant woman with snow-white hair swept into an intricate bun and eyes as sharp and dark as obsidian chips. She looked Ilara up and down, her expression a careful, neutral mask. She greeted her in formal Korean, a test Ilara passed with the polite, respectful phrases her own grandmother had taught her. The assessment had begun. They were standing in a circle with a few of the city's most powerful figures when the disturbance happened. A commotion at the main entrance. Raised voices. The smooth, seamless flow of the party stuttered and stopped. A man had pushed past security. A man who was shouting. Marcus Vance. He looked terrible. His suit was rumpled, his face was gaunt and unshaven, and his eyes had the wild, desperate look of a cornered animal. He scanned the crowd, his gaze landing on their group. On her. "Ilara!" he bellowed, his voice raw. He stumbled towards them, a wedding ring held out in his hand. It was the ring he had tried to give her a year ago, the one she had refused. "Ilara, baby, I was wrong. I was a fool. Come back to me. We can fix this. It's him, isn't it? This gangster. He's poisoned you against me." A heavy, mortified silence fell over the party. All eyes were on them. Jin did not move, his face a calm mask, but Ilara could feel the muscles in his arm tense. Mr. Park and his team were already moving, converging on Marcus from 3 different directions. Before they could reach him, Mrs. Kwan took a step forward. She looked at the pathetic, weeping man making a scene on her lawn. She looked at the beautiful, composed, but clearly distressed young woman on her son's arm. She saw a complication, a mess, a scandal brought into her perfectly ordered world. She turned to Jin and spoke in rapid, dismissive Korean, her voice sharp as broken glass. "주게요, 진우. 왜 이 여자 때문에 이런 문제를 일으켜? 그녀는 아무것도 아니야." Ilara understood every word. "Stop this, Jinwoo. Why are you causing this trouble over this woman? She's nobody." The words struck her with the force of a physical blow. She's nobody. After everything, after clawing her way out of Marcus's shadow, of finally beginning to believe in her own worth, she was still just nobody. A nameless, faceless complication. Something inside her fractured, but before the despair could take hold, Jin moved. He did not get angry. He did not shout. He did something far more devastating. He let go of Ilara's arm, took a half step forward, and placed himself between her and the rest of the world. He looked first at Marcus, then at the silent, watching crowd, and finally, he turned his head and looked directly at his mother. His gaze was cold, with a disappointment that was more chilling than any rage. He then turned back to Ilara, and in front of everyone, he gently took her hand. His touch was warm, firm, and grounding. He lifted her hand, not to his lips, but just holding it in a gesture of profound, public respect. He addressed the silent party, his voice perfectly calm, perfectly clear. It carried across the manicured lawn with absolute authority. "For the benefit of those who may be confused, he began, his voice cutting through the tension. "This man is Marcus Vance. He is the former head of Vance Development, a company I had the pleasure of acquiring in a liquidation sale last Tuesday." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. "He seems to be under the impression that he has some claim on the woman standing with me," Jin continued, his voice dropping slightly, becoming more intense. "Let me be perfectly clear." He paused, letting the silence stretch. He then said her full name, each syllable a perfectly placed stone building a foundation. "This is Alara Sterling." The name hung in the air. Sterling. Not Vance, not his woman. A name of its own. "Miss Sterling," Jin went on, turning his body slightly to present her to the assembled guests as one might present a queen, "is, contrary to Mr. Vance's public claims, the sole architect of the Vance Tower. She is the mind behind the Horizon Project in Dubai and the Sun Garrison Bridge in Singapore. For 5 years, her work was stolen by this man, who passed it off as his own. She was the talent. He was the thief." Mr. Park, as if on cue, stepped forward and began discreetly handing slim folders to several prominent journalists who were among the guests. Inside, Alara knew, was the proof. The contracts, the affidavits, the metadata, the undeniable truth. Jin then turned his full attention to Marcus, who was standing frozen, his face ashen. "As for you, Mr. Vance," Jin said, his voice now devoid of any warmth, a flat, hard instrument of demolition. "As of 9/17 this morning, Kwan Industries assumed ownership of all your outstanding personal and commercial debt. This includes the mortgage on your penthouse, the lease on your car, and the rather substantial line of credit you used to fund your lifestyle. You are not just unemployed, Mr. Vance. You are bankrupt. And you are trespassing on private property." The collapse was total. It was not a slow crumbling, but an instantaneous implosion. Marcus Vance's entire world, the carefully constructed facade of success and power, disintegrated in the space of 30 seconds. The wedding ring fell from his numb fingers and bounced silently on the perfect grass. His face, which had been contorted with rage, dissolved into a mask of pure, abject terror. He made a choking sound, and then his knees buckled. He dropped to the ground, a puppet with its strings cut, and began to sob. Not quiet, dignified tears, but ugly, wrenching, gasping sobs of a man who has lost everything and knows, with crushing certainty, that he will never get it back. Security moved in then, lifting him gently to his feet and guiding the broken, weeping man away into the darkness. The performance was over. Jin did not watch him go. He turned back to the crowd, his expression unchanged, and then he looked at his mother. He spoke to her in Korean, his voice quiet but firm, for her ears alone but in front of all. "그녀는 아무것도 아닌 게 아니에요, 어머니. She is not nobody, mother. 그녀는 콘 인더스트리스의 새로운 건축 누누누이 기반입니다. 그녀는 나의 파트너입니다. She is the foundation of the new Kwan Industries architectural division. She is my partner." The matriarch's eyes widened. She looked at Alara, truly looked at her for the first time, not as a problem, but as a person. She saw the quiet strength, the unbroken dignity, the fierce intelligence in her eyes. And in that moment, the old woman's expression shifted from disdain to a dawning, profound respect. She gave Alara a slight, almost imperceptible nod. The assessment was over. She had passed. Jin then began to introduce Alara to the most powerful people in the country, one by one. "Governor, I would like you to meet Alara Sterling, the brilliant mind who will be designing the new city arts complex. Ambassador, this is Miss Sterling. Her vision for sustainable urban living is something we must discuss." He did not present her as his lover or his prize. He presented her as his equal. Later that night, long after the last guest had departed, they stood on a stone terrace overlooking the sleeping gardens. The air was cool and smelled of pine needles and damp earth. Ilara leaned against the balustrade, the silence a welcome blanket. The weight that had been sitting on her chest for 5 years, a dense, suffocating pressure, was finally gone. She felt light. She felt placed. Jin came to stand beside her, not touching, but his presence a warm, solid certainty in the darkness. They stood in comfortable silence for a long time, watching the moon rise over the distant mountains. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice soft. "I did nothing," he replied. "I simply corrected the record. You gave me a voice when I didn't have one." "You always had a voice, Alara," he said, turning to look at her. "You just needed a soundproof room to speak in, so that you were the only one who could be heard." She smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes and made them shine in the moonlight. She reached out, her fingers tracing the lapel of his suit jacket. He caught her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. It was a gesture of simple, profound connection, the kind of connection built not on passion, but on the bedrock of mutual respect and recognition. The next 6 months were a whirlwind of creation. Alara thrived. Freed from the oppressive gravity of Marcus's ego, her talent exploded. She designed a hospital that felt like a sanctuary, a library that was a cathedral to knowledge, and a series of public parks that brought green, breathing life back into forgotten corners of the city. Her name was everywhere, her face on the cover of design magazines. She was no longer a ghost. She was a force. Jin was her constant, quiet support. He was the foundation on which she built her new world. He challenged her, pushed her, and celebrated her triumphs with a quiet nod of approval that meant more to her than 1,000 flowery compliments. Their partnership was forged in the crucible of late-night work sessions, heated debates over structural materials, and shared meals in the quiet of her new apartment, a minimalist loft she had designed herself. One evening, they were standing over a scale model of their most ambitious project yet, a complete revitalization of the city's old industrial waterfront. It was a legacy project, one that would redefine the city for a century. "It's good," he said, his eyes tracing the elegant lines of the residential towers she had designed, "but it could be better. The North Plaza feels disconnected." She tilted her head, considering it. "You're right. It needs a bridge. Not just a physical one, a symbolic one, something that connects the history of the place with its future." "Show me," he said. They worked for hours, sketching and debating, their minds in perfect sync. Sometime after midnight, she looked up from the plans and found him watching her, a strange, soft expression on his face. "What?" she asked, a faint blush rising on her cheeks. "I'm thinking about the future," he said, his voice low. "Our future." It was not a declaration of love in the traditional sense. It was a statement of fact, a business proposal for a merger of two lives, and it was the most romantic thing she had ever heard. The story did not end with a wedding or a dramatic kiss in the rain. It ended quietly as their story had begun. It ended with a decision, a choice. It ended with two people standing over a model of a city they were building together, their hands brushing as they both reached for the same pencil. It ended not with a happily ever after, but with the quiet, steady, and infinitely more beautiful promise of what comes next. A future built not on a fairy tale, but on the solid, unshakable foundation of a partnership between equals. They were not just building a city, they were building a life. And for the first time, Alara Sterling knew with absolute certainty that she was home.